I'm Brittany, this is Mo Run, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch and read gay things. So sorry for the weirdness in the Gaywatch break room just now. I think what happened was that when I was sorting through and making new quotes for the stream, I accidentally saved something as a JPEG and not a PNG, which, not to get too crunchy, but that basically means that it would do that because it's supposed to be transparent, but it's not. I thought something was wrong with the stream, which is why I restarted it on my end. But in hindsight, I think that that's actually what happened. So I'll fix that so it no longer does a weird, holy coming to Jesus moment in the break room, because that was odd. Hello, we are continuing the lovely volume 9 of Erha today, where Shui Jin-young is almost certainly going to his death. So it's going to be another fun stream around here. We read for a couple of hours, and we usually take a break around halfway through, and we get through these days around 40 to 45 pages. I think today is a little bit on the shorter end at around like 38, somewhere around there. But now the chunks in which I read have been broken up by someone who is not me. So I do what they say. I do what they tell me. And today it's 3 chapters, I believe, at around like 38 pages. So previously on Erha, we, Mo Run, went to sleep. Chuaning had some major growth on the front of his need for perfection, to be perfect, to be seen as perfect and infallible and pristine, I think would be the word to choose with him. And he no longer gives a shit because he just wants to be with Moran, and love is more important than being seen as flawless, which we love that for him. We just wish it didn't have to come with quite such heart-wrenching circumstances. So now Shui Jin-young is getting ready to go out and deal with a little problem of everyone wanting to disband Xisheng Peak. So it's going to be a nice chill stream today. There are trigger warnings down in the description box should you need them. I believe they are spoiler-free. And there is also a link down in the description to the public version of the Gaywatch Discord. It's an evergreen link. You can click on it whenever you want. And that's where all of the queer bookish conversations happen around danmei, around other books we've read on the stream. It's just kind of a good time. So that's also there if you need to chat, or in this case, maybe cry with other people about Erha. We are on page 181 for chapter 282, which is called A Lone Wolf Backed into a Corner. Again, Shui Jin-young's gonna be fine. It's fine, guys. It's whatever. Just in case anyone is new here, because I know that does indeed happen. I have not read this. This is a reaction more so than any kind of audiobook situation. So there is sometimes frequent stops for flailing, crying, commentary, theorizing, and the like. I just haven't said that in a while, so I just wanted to make sure that that was the thing that is continually communicated, because God, that would be weird to go into something expecting an audiobook and getting me. I'm delaying the inevitable. It's normal. It's healthy. Shui Jin-young stood with the Xisheng Peak disciples and elders inside Loyalty Hall, eyeing their unwelcome visitors. It seemed the great sects had reached a consensus. Even Zheng Shi, arguably more reasonable than the rest, stood among their ranks. Man, where's that Tyra Banks meme when you need one? We were all rooting for you. The prospect of challenging another sect brought him no joy, but given his position as leader of the sects, he had little choice. This matter was too grave, and too much evidence had emerged against Xisheng Peak over the past few days. So I'm therefore expecting him to change his tune as we discuss and listen to Shui Jingyang? Is that a high bar? That might be a high bar. On the other side of the hall, the Xisheng Peak disciples were none too happy themselves. They'd been run ragged over the last week, putting out fires, only to now face accusations that they'd been concealing malicious intentions all along. It didn't help that the upper cultivation realm had come charging in with fiery accusations, prepared to doubt their every word. As the conversation continued, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. That's why I said that listening might be a high bar. Let me repeat myself, said Shui Jingyang. Xisheng Peak did not knowingly give Mo Run any forbidden technique scrolls, nor encourage his pursuit of the forbidden techniques, nor secretly practice the Zhenlong chess formation. And we sure as hell weren't trying to use those techniques to take over the cultivation realm. Yu Heng and Mo Run aren't even here right now. Please be reasonable. What's your second wish, Shui Jingyang? Out of all the sects of the upper cultivation realm, Bitan Manor and Jiangdong Hall had the deepest grudges against Xisheng Peak. The 100 or so members of Jiangdong Hall that remained after the fiasco on Mount Jiao had publicly renounced Huang Xiaoyue, but deep down their allegiances had never left their sect leader. They exchanged darting glances, and one person sneered, "Easy for you to say, Shui Zhengmen. You claim Xisheng Peak's innocence, yet the pile of evidence against you grows by the day. Appearances can be deceiving. Who knows what you guys are really up to?" How sturdy is that pile of evidence? Because, a pile of shit evidence is still a pile of shit, more so than it is evidence. That's right. All the Zhenlong chess pieces that have been caught wreaking havoc in the cultivation realm have turned out to be people from Xisheng Peak. Coincidence? I think not. Jesus. It's the lack of critical thinking. Like, these guys in the modern day are trying to convince me that two actors are having a secret affair because of suspiciously timed likes on Instagram and TikTok. That's what they are. You know what I find strange? A Baton Manor member chimed in. Xisheng Peak has gone on countless exorcism missions in the lower cultivation realm over the past 2 decades, fighting to secure the most arduous and tedious jobs and rarely demanding payment. Once or twice, sure, I'd buy that they're doing it out of altruism, but for 20 years, isn't that kind of absurd? You are telling on yourself. This is one of the times when I stop a lot, apparently. You are telling on yourself, sir. And or madam. Did they even say? It doesn't even matter. You just told on yourself. Being a good person, helping people for 20 years? Can't be real. My brother and I built this sect from the ground up to help the common people in the lower cultivation realm, Shui Jingyang snapped. My conscience is clear. I've always lived by my principles. Unheard of to these people. Your principles, the Baton Manor member sneered. Shui Jingyang and his principles produced a disciple who practices the forbidden techniques, and a Zongsha who murdered innocent men and women to free him. Shui Zhengmen, both these evildoers came from Xisheng Peak, yet you have the gall to speak of your principles. Have we not, whoever made the observation, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody in this, I think in this fucking volume, made the observation about, you know, if one person is good in a group, then the entire group must be good. And if one person is bad, then the entire group must be bad. And how that is really said something. That was foreshadowing, I feel. That's right, someone agreed, scoffing. What a pretty speech by Shui Jingyang. Help the common people. There's no one on earth who would do good deeds without any expectation of reward for 20 whole years. He's got to have some ulterior motive. Again, skill issue. You're telling on yourself. Shitty people project so hard. They just naturally believe that that's just how the world is. Everyone's shitty. What are you talking about? I'm average. I'm normal, which is therefore code for acceptable. My behavior is acceptable because that's what everybody does. And then there's the matter of that huge wave of unidentifiable pawns that appeared out of nowhere. They couldn't have been made overnight. Who knows, perhaps when Xisheng Peak was going around performing exorcisms and such over the past few years, they were secretly amassing an army of pawns. Shui Meng, listening in, had had enough with this last slanderous statement. He shot to his feet and unsheathed his blade, sending his cup clattering to the floor. Are you done running your bloody mouths? His words were met with silence. He raked his eyes over the assembly, gaze murderous. Spreading rumors amongst yourselves is one thing, but to bring this dog shit here to Xisheng Peak, you've got some fucking nerve. Audience insert, Shui Meng. Thank you, sir. Jiangdong Hall was a sect on its last legs, and the recent loss of so many of its senior members had left its newly elected leader at something of a loss. This new leader was a maiden no older than 17, with nothing going for her besides her good looks. She'd relied on the affections of her Xishiang to raise her to her current position. The young lady was not only ignorant of etiquette, but also shallow and immature, and presumed everyone she met was as susceptible to her... Ooh. This is one of those words that I've read so much, but I don't think I've heard said out loud a lot. Wow, my brain really can't. You know, it's a version of coquette, like coquettishness. So, like, my brain wants to say, like, coquetry, but that feels weird. Coquetry, hilarious. I'd have to look that up. Actually, you know what? I keep a pen here for just such an occasion. What is the emphasis on what syllable? You know what I'm saying? As susceptible to her feminine wiles as her own unfortunate sectmates. Zumingaga, don't be mad, she said, smiling coyly. When Shui Meng didn't reply, she continued, It spoils your good looks when you scowl like that. This elicited a scattering of snickers. Despite the tense atmosphere, several cultivators were unable to contain their reactions. Sect members from Huohong Pavilion and Tashui Palace stared at the so-called sect leader as they might an imbecile. The young lady, under the misapprehension that she would be universally adored by all men, raised her chin to bare her snow-white neck and declared, If you feel you've faced some injustice, why not talk about it peaceably? As long as you're reasonable, under my leadership, the 10 great sects of the upper cultivation realm will treat you fairly. You know what would be funny? If this guileless, ignorant chick who, like, just doesn't know, like, what if she, like, stumbled into actual fairness because she's ignorant as to how all of this shit works? That would be too funny. But also deeply satisfying. At this, even the sect leaders who'd remained stoic could no longer hold back. Taobao Estates Ma Yun, being a merchant with a mind for math, let out a startled, "Pardon? How many great sects of the upper cultivation realm? 10, you say?" Tashui Palace's palace leader, Ming Yulo, replied expressionlessly, "She miscounted. Ignore her." "Ah, got it." The easygoing Ma Yun subsided with a smile. The expressions on Wu Bei Temple's Master Shuang Jing, as well as the elders of Huohong and Shenqing pavilions, were not nearly so equanimous. Yet, however dark the expressions on the other sect leaders' faces, they couldn't hold a candle to Zheng Shi's. Though he didn't say a word, the girl's declaration of undermined leadership had clearly gotten under his skin. He fidgeted with his sect leader's ring and eyed her dourly. The girl was still going, completely oblivious. "Let's all take a moment to talk things over calmly. We can take turns saying our piece and then circle back. Wouldn't that be nice?" You see what I mean? Somebody genuinely, guilelessly being like, now, let's all genuinely talk out our feelings and assess the situation and treat everything fairly. You see what I'm saying? I'm not crazy about this. Sparks practically flew from Shuimeng's reply. "Circle your ass back home if you want to talk. Sichuan is no place for silly girls like you." You can't be, looking a gift horse in the mouth like this, Shuimeng. Granted, you're not really thinking right now. Startled tears welled up in the young lady's eyes, and she turned back to her Da Shixiang and Da Shishu with a sniffle. He's being so mean. He scolded me." The rest came out between sobs. "I was just talking. Why is he being so fierce?" Zheng Shi, Ming Yulo, and Master Xuanjing watched the spectacle in silence. One member of the audience murmured under their breath, "Jiangdong Hall is really done for. Who's this little chit? She can't compare to Huang Xiaoyue." "We would hope not." Mei Han Shui was also in attendance. Sorry. Mei Han Shui is here. And I just said in the book chat how I'm not getting that fucking whale out of the break room that was named after Mei Han Shui until he shows up. He has finally been summoned. He's here. I'm very normal about this. Actually, I'm going to take this opportunity to adjust the mic because I'm very, in the camera today. So I need space, especially if Mei Han Shui shows up. Mei Han Shui was also in attendance. On hearing this, he rubbed his nose and said with a smile, "Not true. The young lady certainly beats Huang Xiaoyue in looks." He doesn't disappoint. "I have been richly rewarded for my patience, sir. Thank you so much." The foolish girl's crying sent her Jiangdong Hall Shixiang into a tizzy. One young man, more naive than the rest, fished out a handkerchief for her to wipe her face, then turned icily to Shuimeng, behavior truly befitting the disciple of Chu Zongsha and the cousin of Mo Ran. The topic of Chu Wanning and Mo Ran was a sore point for Shuimeng, one not to be brought up. Shuimeng narrowed his eyes dangerously, but the fellow continued, laying a deep, sarcastic emphasis on each word. "Disciple to a criminal and cousin to a murderer, yet you have the gall to strut around like you're so magnificent." The words had hardly left his mouth when Long Chung flashed, its point coming to rest at the young man's throat. Silence fell over the hall. The fellow had never expected Shuimeng to threaten him so directly with that cold, glinting blade. The equally frigid look in Shuimeng's eyes sent his reason fleeing, and his face paled as his mouth opened and closed around words he no longer dared to say. "That's right. I'm magnificent. You're saying I'm not?" Shui Meng's hand trembled with the force of his rage, and the tip of his blade, pressed to the man's neck, broke skin. What about you? Who the hell are you to come to Xisheng Peak and talk shit to me like this? Angry Shui Meng, you know? Like the stream if you agree. I don't know, drop an emoji. Angry Shui Meng. Drop some fire emojis for Angry Shui Meng. You know what I'm saying? One of my favorite versions of Shui Meng. Thank you. The sight of Shui Meng's naked anger conversely calmed Shui Jingyang. He said heavily, "Sit down, Meng-er." Shui Meng turned and shot back. Am I supposed to let them keep slandering us like this? Shui Jingyang looked back at him, helplessly. Shui Meng's gaze swung to scrutinize each gossip monger individually. His chest heaved, and when he opened his mouth to speak, his voice shook with anger despite his efforts to keep it steady. Unbelievable. Xisheng Peak has never acted unjustly. We've always sent our disciples rushing at any sign of trouble. Why do you think we went through all that trouble? For fame? For money? For forbidden techniques? That's exactly what they think. All the fire in the fucking chat. I see you. The chilly glare from Longcheng shimmered in the air. Honored cultivators and sect leaders, he gritted out with red-rimmed eyes, tearing into the gathered audience's self-important posturing. Let me ask you, 20 years ago, when Wuchang Town was nearly overrun by ghosts, where were you? 15 years ago, when there was a heavenly rift over Sichuan that left 9 out of 10 houses grieving, where were you? 3 years ago, when the barrier over Butterfly Town once again tore open and swarms of demons forced the common people from their homes to wander the land, starving, once again, where were you? There was a watery sheen to his gaze, but his voice was unyielding, adamant in its intensity. Over the years, the lower cultivation realm has sent plea after plea for help, has begged you all to lift one finger to aid, to no avail. How much did Rufeng sect charge for their exorcism services? The refugees of the lower cultivation realm can hardly afford food to put on their tables, let alone the services of such honorable cultivators as yourselves. This is what I mean about Angry Shui Meng. Thank you. Give the boy an opportunity to run his mouth. It's very satisfying. These words seemed to hit home. Several of the listeners bowed their heads in consideration, yet others were all too willing to lay the blame at Rufeng Sect's feet and wasted no time jabbering. That's right, Rufeng Sect was heartless, but that's got nothing to do with us. My sect only charges a few hundred silver for exorcism services. Young Master Shui is painting us all with too broad a brush with these accusations. Okay. Right. A few hundred silver, Shui Meng sneered. Daozhang, have you ever visited a Sichuan village before? The naysayer could not muster a reply. Go take a look at the southern regions of Sichuan. See for yourself what Fengdu Ghost City is like, what's left at the base of Mount Amei. Then talk to me about a few hundred silver. Young Master Shui, this humble one knows you hold pain and suffering in your heart. Master Xuanjing sighed with regret, yet his next few words undermined his brief show of sympathy. But the fact remains that Xisheng Peak has produced a disciple who pursued the forbidden techniques, not to mention an elder who, in order to protect him, broke him out of Tianyin Pavilion's sentencing grounds and killed 11 of their cultivators in the process. Xisheng Peak must answer for these 2 wrongdoers' misdeeds. Shui Meng was furious, his scowl so dark it was like a thundercloud on his brow. Did the master not see with his own eyes how many Tianyin Pavilion members there were on the platform? They were attacking with deadly force. Was Shizun supposed to sit there and wait to be killed? A bystander immediately pounced on the implication hidden in his impulsive outburst. Oh, so young Master Shui thinks Chuaning and Mo Run were right to resist Tianyin Pavilion. Making excuses for a murderer. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's inexcusable. Xishang Peak is beyond saving. It has to go. The problem with torch-wielding villagers? They won't be happy until they get to set something on fire. This last line was too much for Shui Jingyang. Fury pulsed through him, making his injury flare with pain. He clenched his fist and endured the agony before fixing his gaze on the speaker, expression dark. Surely you jest. It's no jest. Shui Jingyang's eyes narrowed and he slowly turned to face the source of the voice. Jing Shi. Jing Shi had not participated in the smear campaign, but neither had he spoken up in support of Xishang Peak. He stood in the hall, inscrutable in his pale green robes embroidered with silver polyflowers. In truth, he had no desire to wade into this muddy discourse, but if he didn't speak now, the situation would only escalate. He raised his eyes to meet Shui Jingyang's. According to the cultivation world's rules, if a disciple studies the forbidden techniques, it doesn't matter if they learned it in secret. The failure lies with the sect for their negligence in failing to teach the disciple better. Shui Jingyang's face went deathly pale. To prevent further trouble, Jiang Shi continued, once it's been discovered, it's expected the sect will take immediate measures to denounce the disciple and detain them. Surely Shui Jiangmen is not unaware of this. He was aware. But although it was true that the rule existed, it hadn't been enforced in centuries, if ever. How many disciples did the average sect have? There was no way to keep an eye on every single one at all times. Whether Rufeng or Guiwei, Wubei Temple or Shangqing Pavilion. No sect could confidently say they'd never produced one or two disciples who'd attempted the forbidden techniques. Master Huizui was well known for his mastery of the rebirth technique, yet would anybody go up to Wubei Temple and demand their abbot step down? The rule was frankly meant more as a deterrent than a law, in the true sense of the word. Yet now this almost forgotten decree was being wielded to bludgeon Xishang Peak while they were down. These cultivators feared Xishang Peak was plotting some dark conspiracy and had reached for this obscure rule to force the sect into dissolution. I am indeed armed with some regular lemonade from my friend Mike. Shui Jingyang was silent, but his expression was dark as he glared at Jiang Shi like a lone wolf surrounded on all sides. Pardon me. That was close enough to the chapter title. After a moment, he asked Jiang Shi, "Don't you find this absurd?" "I do, but the rules are clear. My hands are tied." "Rules," Shui Jingyang scoffed. His fingers kneaded at the sculpted beasts on the armrests of his sect leader's seat as he closed his eyes and sighed. For 20 years, the upper cultivation realm has had the final say on how strictly or leniently the rules are enforced. Nothing's changed. Can we get some fire in the chat for Angry Shui Daddy? 'Cause, it runs in the family. Ooh. 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 Oh. Thank you, sir. A conflicted look flitted across Jiang Shi's face. He pressed his lips together instead of answering. It was another sect leader who butted in to say, "Shui Jiangmen, please follow the rules and dissolve Xishang Peak. Nobody is above the law, Shui Jiangmen. You know what you need to do. Everything has laws governing it. After all the trouble you've caused, are you really going to try and claim you're innocent?" In the buzz of the crowd, someone turned to Jiang Shi. "Jiang Jiangmen, we've received complaints from every major city. Xishang Peak must face the consequences of their actions. You're the leader of the cultivation realm. Isn't it time you started acting like it?" Jiang Shi remained silent as the crowd's attention turned to him. His brows drew together, and after a moment he said evenly, there have indeed been many accusations leveled against Xisheng Peak. Given the current unrest, we cannot afford to take them lightly. Shui Zhengmen, by law, Xisheng Peak must be disbanded. If, at some later time, you can furnish evidence that proves your innocence, perhaps we can... He was interrupted by an indignant shout. Jiang Shi, watch yourself! Young Master Shui, Jiang Shi said, after a moment's pause. He was by nature apathetic and unused to being rushed. Already irked at having his hands forced by the sex, his mood was not improved by being snapped at by a brat who dared to address him without his title. The veins on his forehead throbbed as he narrowed his eyes at Shui Meng. Haven't I told you not to interrupt when your elders are speaking? You're over 20, yet you're sorely lacking compared to your fellow young master Nangong Se. His harsh response merely stoked the flames of Shui Meng's fury. With one foot, he shoved aside the cultivator in front of him and charged toward Jiang Shi, gripping his lapels and shoving the sect leader against a pillar. Jiang Shi! Shui Meng's gaze was sharp as a blade, his blood surging in his veins. His words came out dripping with hatred. Comparing me to Nangong Se? Why not compare yourself to Nangong Lu and see how you like that? Maybe I should have had some tea next to the lemonade, you know what I'm saying? Despite the assault on his person, Jiang Shi's expression only grew chillier. You're young, so I'll give you some advice. Unhand me. But of course, Shui Meng wouldn't listen. He'd been pushed far past the point of endurance and continued through a clenched jaw. If you ask me, you're even less fit than Nangong Lu to lead the cultivation world. You've twisted everything around, turned right into wrong. Everyone was shocked at this turn of events. Even Guguea's own disciples were slow to react. They'd never expected anyone to lay hands on their sect leader like this. Glaring straight into Jiang Shi's icy gaze, Shui Meng bit out, Jiang Shi, you bastard. These final words sent Loyalty Hall into an uproar. The impudence! Shui Meng, how dare you speak to your elders this way? So much for the darling of the heavens, all that training wasted on a lowlife like you. Jiang Shi lifted his chin, a faint light flashing in his eyes as he stared Shui Meng down. He reached up to grip the hand Shui Meng had wrapped in his lapels. One twist of his wrist and... pop. The sickening sound of a joint dislocating echoed through the hall. Shui Meng grunted in pain. Meng Er! With the cool composure of someone who had just tossed out the trash, Jiang Shi shoved Shui Meng away and fastidiously straightened his attire before turning to Shui Jingyang. Shui Jingyang, what a fine job you've done raising your son. Shui Meng's shoulder was dislocated, yet he still made to charge right back, only stopped by Guguea's disciples drawing their swords. At the end of his patience, Jiang Shi knit his brows and snapped, Dissolve the sect. Dissolve the sect! Xisheng Peak needs to be dissolved. The dense mass of people swarmed inward. Nothing was more effective than fear in uniting people beneath its banner. There's already been some real shit said in this chapter. Some shit deeply applicable to kind of basically just kind of all society through the ages, or really kind of all government throughout the ages. That's, but boy, it's gonna be hard to top the fact of nothing was more effective than fear in uniting people beneath its banner. Yep. And when you keep them angry, too? Yeah. Why, whatever could that be reminding me, an American, of? right now. From the countless roaring mouths of the crowd came the same cry. Xisheng Peak, this breeding ground for evil, must be dismantled and dissolved without delay. That's the end of the chapter. It conveniently looked like it was just the end of a page, but no. Must be dismantled and dissolved without delay. That's the end of the chapter. Oh, man! We're on page 193 for chapter 283, which is called The Beacons Are Lit. Now all of China knows you're here. The atmosphere within Loyalty Hall was so tense the slightest spark would set it ablaze. Xisheng Peak's disciples stood off against the disciples from the other sects, neither side willing to budge. Like a bow pulled to full draw, either the arrow would fly or the string would snap. Tashui Palace's leader, Ming Yuelo, stepped forward out of the crowd. May I remind everyone that the law is not a living, breathing thing? Her mild, melodious voice broke the strained silence. In Xisheng Peak's view, with no definite proof that they've created any pawns, the call to dissolve the sect must indeed appear extreme. A suggestion, if I may. Let us confiscate Xisheng Peak's scrolls on forbidden techniques as a precautionary measure, then come to a decision after we've had the chance to properly investigate. Hey, a cooler head! What are the odds she prevails? Master Xuanjing shook his head. Palace leader Ming, do not let your close relationship with Shui Chengmen cloud your judgment. Of course. Xisheng Peak has already violated a taboo of the cultivation world. What need is there for further investigation? No, if I speak, we're not going to get past this page for the next hour. Xisheng Peak is not the only sect to have committed such a violation, Abbot. You know this. Though her voice was pleasant, I'm too beside myself. Ming Yuelo's tone was resolute. If you wish to press on details, I would remind you of your own sex, Master Huaizui. Am I a fan of her? You! Xuanjing scowled and shook his sleeves out before regaining his composure. He put his fingers together and said, a technique used to save lives is not the same as the Zhenlong chess formation. Is that life-saving technique not one of the 3 forbidden techniques? The one who'd spoken this time was Shui Zhengyang. By now, those close to him were beginning to realize something was wrong. The sect leader's breathing was labored and his lips were pale. His demeanor was a shadow of his usual confident swagger. What? That is true, Xuanjing reluctantly conceded. Shui Jingyang closed his eyes and sighed. After a moment, he opened them to look at Master Xuanjing and said in a hoarse voice, then how can the abbot make an exception to the rules just because it's a technique that can save people? Is it forbidden or not? Xuanjing hesitated, unable to think of a rebuttal. He eventually landed on, they are 2 entirely different things. No, they're both forbidden. If that's an issue, de-forbidden the one that saves people. But until you do that, they're both forbidden. What do you mean 2 entirely different things? A disciple of Xisheng Peak burst out in reproach. The upper cultivation realm has its fair share of those who've studied forbidden techniques. They just weren't successful. If you're going to use this law against us, shouldn't you lead by example and disband your own sects? See, thank you. Wu Bei Temple has Huaizui and Guyue has Hua Binan, the Tianlong elder said darkly. So why is it only Xisheng Peak that's being called to account? If Zhang Jiangmen wish to shut down Xisheng Peak, why not first announce that you're dissolving Guyue? Hearing their own logic turned against them, the gathered sects felt their consciences pricked. Not so much logic turned against them as logic actually followed through to its natural conclusion instead of cherry-picked to suit an agenda. Those who had been loudest earlier were now silent, hoping their own sects wouldn't be dragged in next. Shui Jingyang coughed weakly, lashes lowered as he discreetly swiped away the blood he'd coughed into his palm. He looked up and forced a laugh. Well, it seems no one here is innocent, and I've seen no evidence of the ridiculous claim that Xisheng Peak is creating pawns to, what was it, turn the cultivation world upside down? If I may be so bold, perhaps it's time for you all to take your leave. He don't need to be hot about it, all right? I know I asked for flame emojis, but that don't mean he gets to be hot about it. The mob, so self-righteous in their efforts to stamp this sect out of existence, had never expected the confrontation to end in such a mortifying stalemate. Their expressions had grown truly ugly. Zheng Shi had only made the journey here with the other sects because the conclusion seemed inevitable. He'd had no enthusiasm for the endeavor to begin with. On seeing that the mob was vacillating, he closed his eyes and said bluntly, "Let us leave for now." These words brought no small measure of relief to Shui Jingyang's heart. He couldn't help sighing, the tension in his spine easing slightly. Yet in the next moment, he felt a stabbing pain. He glanced down. Bloodstains were spreading across the dark blue of his robes at his waist. The injury he'd taken yesterday was much worse than he'd realized. He'd need to get the Tanlong Elder to take a look at it soon. Man. Don't Game of Thrones me. And I'm not going to say any more than that, because spoilers. But don't fucking Game of Thrones me, meat bun. I'm looking at you. He'd scarcely finished the thought when the doors crashed open, and a dozen Tianyin Pavilion disciples charged in with swords drawn. Their expressions were icy, and as they flooded into the hall, they shouted in carrying tones, "For shame, Shui Jingyang! How can you claim Xisheng Peak has never made pawns?" The mob of cultivators hadn't expected anyone from Tianyin Pavilion, and their heads snapped around in shock. Yeah, that happened so fucking fast, I didn't even register it at first. Yet what surprised them more was the line of several dozen plainly dressed commoners meekly following in Tianyin Pavilion's wake. Some of them were familiar faces, village heads from a few of the smaller villages in Sichuan. Have we arrived to speak on behalf of Xisheng Peak? What's happening? Someone asked. Didn't you ask for proof? A senior disciple from Tianyin Pavilion said darkly. Well, will these witnesses do? They're not the witnesses I wanted. Another disciple turned to the mob. Xisheng Peak is a cesspool of evil, and their leader's the worst of them all. They've been treating Sichuan like their own personal hunting grounds these past few years, forcing the commoners they claim to protect into sacrificing their own children to become Zhenlong pawns. Here are the witnesses. What more proof do you need? Bold to act like no witness has ever been bought in the history of society, but okay. Shui Jingyang leapt to his feet, eyes sparking with fury, and choked through the blood in his throat. What nonsense! You say it's nonsense, I say otherwise. Ask them yourself and see. The villagers, clustered together like a group of startled ducks, shrank into themselves, all staring at their feet. None dared to be the first to speak. I wonder why? Village Chief Lu, blurted Shui Meng, his keen eyes spotting a familiar face in the crowd. Chief Lu shivered violently, darting a quick sideways glance at Shui Meng before skimming off like a slippery fish. What are you doing here? Shui Meng was pitifully naive when it came to certain things. He still hadn't realized what was happening. Chief Lu swallowed thickly, his withered fingers twisting anxiously in his sleeves. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor, shuffling awkwardly in place. Speak the truth, a Tianyin Pavilion disciple ordered him. Tianyin Pavilion will tolerate no lies. I'm stunned he didn't burst into flames. Another shiver racked Chief Lu, and he dropped to his knees, kowtowing frantically on the floor. I'll talk. Over the years, Xisheng Peak has pretended to perform exorcisms for free, but in truth, they've been forcing us to give over our children to them as payment. Bullshit! Shui Jingyong roared, slapping the table. Continue, the voice of the Tianyin Pavilion disciple overrode his outburst. What did they want your children for? I don't know. An oily sheen of sweat gleamed on the village chief's brow as he swallowed again, still shivering. They said they'd teach them cultivation, but we never saw them again. Xiao Huzi, Xiao Shutou, they never came back home. The Tianyin Pavilion disciple turned to the group from Xisheng Peak. Are there any children with these names among your number? There was no response. How could there be? Shui Meng's blood boiled with fury. Xiao Huzi, Xiao Shutou. By the time he'd reached this man's village to save it, those children had long been eaten by the demons attacking the villagers. Liar! Bile rose in Shui Meng's throat as he shouted, so enraged he felt ill with it. This is how you repay our kindness? Have you no conscience? See? I'm actually giving the chief and these villagers the benefit of the doubt, because it may not be as easy as we'll give you some money and they just turned on the people who saved them. They could be getting exploited just like, well, kind of everything else. Tears streamed down the village chief's face, but whatever coercive hold Tianyin Pavilion had on him compelled him to continue. Xisheng Peak is not a good sect. They put up a righteous front, but the truth is they've done all sorts of awful things in Sichuan. Snot joined the tears flowing down his face, yet he still didn't dare look up, directing his next words at the ground in a howl. Xisheng Peak is a scourge on the lower cultivation realm. The crowd exploded with chatter. In any other circumstances, cultivators wouldn't give a moment's consideration to the words of common folk. But the mob had come here today with the goal of disbanding Xisheng Peak, and their minds had long been made up. Yeah, they're not going to give poor people the time of day unless the poor people show up being useful and saying what they want to hear. They latched onto this proof with a fervor and turned it into fuel for their outrage. I knew there was some ulterior motive behind their so-called good deeds. Shui Jingyong, what do you have to say for yourself now? Shui Jingyong and Shui Meng were stunned, to say nothing of the disciples and elders of Xisheng Peak. It was one thing to face the mob of cultivators who'd joined forces to besiege them. Then they could wave their arms about and decry the injustice, the slander. But it was another thing entirely to be set upon by these village chiefs and common folk from Sichuan. These were the same folk who had offered them eggs and flour as a tearful thanks for saving their lives, who had sworn their undying gratitude, who said they'd never be able to thank them enough. These traitorous wolves had personally driven the knife into their loyal hearts. It hurt. Like falling through a hole in the ice into the freezing water beneath, the shock was so painful it numbed them to the core. More villagers came forward, one after another. The first had eyes that at least held traces of regret, and the second stepped out on trembling legs. The third, though, was able to meet the gazes of the cultivators. The fourth spoke with righteous conviction. By the fifth, the speaker was comfortable adding embellishment to the others' tales. They were like a flock of wild geese. They merely needed one bird to take the lead, and the rest would follow. Enough voices singing the same tune could turn fiction into fact, and as witness after witness came forward, they grew increasingly impassioned, increasingly convinced of their own rightness. The whole line should be written down. But specifically, enough voices singing the same tune could turn fiction into fact. If I start talking, we're not going to get off this page in the next hour. Although Shui Meng's blood ran cold, he couldn't help curling his lip in a sneer. He'd once believed everyone had a backbone, a line they wouldn't cross. He'd never expected so many could stomach the taste of manure to save their own skins. Well, it depends on exactly how much of their skin is at stake. It could be as simple as, say this or I'll kill you, which, in and of itself, survival instinct, it's a very easy way to get people to do what you need for them to do. But it could also be, say what we want you to say, or we'll kill you and everyone you love, and we'll make you watch as we kill everyone you love. Like, there could be really horrifying, extenuating circumstances. Not that Shui Meng has no right to be feeling what he's feeling, or anyone in the family, actually. But that's why I'm reserving rage for if we find that out or not. That's right. It's what's it called chess piece. The speaker was the matchmaker from Jia village. She hastened to add, They made us give up our children to them in exchange for their help clearing out demons. Xisheng Peak doesn't seek wealth. All they want is children. This is something everybody in the lower cultivation realm knows. Jiang Shi knit his brows. If that's so, why seek their help at all? We had no choice. The matchmaker wiped at her eyes with a pink handkerchief. We're too poor to afford help from the upper cultivation realm. We had no choice but to send over our little ones. They said the children would learn cultivation at Xisheng Peak, but everyone knew. She sobbed. We all knew we'd never see those poor children alive ever again. She thumped her chest and wailed in agony. That's right. Xisheng Peak takes payment in people, not coin, a scholar chimed in. We had to survive, didn't we? So we could only grieve in private. But thank goodness the heavens have eyes and revealed their true nature. Now Xisheng Peak's evil deeds have finally caught up to them. Honored cultivators, please bring justice to the commoners of the lower cultivation realm. Fear not, someone from Jiangdong Hall leapt to the call. The upper cultivation realm is upright and honorable. All of us here today are from respectable, prestigious sects with long histories. Justice will be served. The villagers who'd come forward as witnesses began weeping in gratitude, stepping up one after another to sob their grievances against Xisheng Peak's evil deeds. All of them knew that once they'd spoken, there was no turning back. If Xisheng Peak didn't fall today, a reckoning awaited them. In that moment, it was as if the hall was filled not with people, but with circling, scavenging ghosts, opening their bloody maws to gnaw at the weathered pillars supporting the roof, to tear at the simple hangings on the walls, to rip through the plaque above the door that bore the words Loyalty Hall, fallen into disrepair from lack of funds, and tear it into bloody shreds. How? Shui Meng shuddered, his eyes closing against the tears that fell in spite of him. His voice, when the words emerged at last, was hoarse. How can you say all this? Were they blinded by Tianyan Pavilion's prestige? Had they been threatened? How could they say such things? How could they do this? The matchmaker was still going. Scraps of the vitriol flying from her red-painted lips drifted into Shui Meng's ears. Xisheng Peak secretly made pawns. They treated human lives like cattle, stealing our own children from us. Every word, every sentence, twisted the truth into a nightmarish refrain. A scourge on the lower cultivation realm, wolves in sheep's clothing. Chuaning and Mo Run are the worst of the lot. How many innocent lives did they ruin to make all those pawns? Hatred gnawed at Shui Meng's bones. His hands trembled with the intensity of it, all rationality crumbling in the face of its venomous touch. How can you say such a thing? How can you do this? Wrath was like a termite, burrowing through the last of his heart's foundations. Shui Meng shoved his dislocated shoulder back into place with a pop and reached for Longcheng. It hissed out of its sheath in a deadly arc. Before anyone in the crowd could react, its curved blade was stained with blood. The matchmaker, spouting off about how Xisheng Peak disciples went around raping young girls, froze mid-word, then lowered her head to look at her own chest. She opened her mouth, but all that emerged was a splatter of blood before she crumpled to the ground, silent at last. The hall went deathly still. Yet wasn't it strange? Though there were several Tianyin Pavilion members standing near the crowd of villagers, not one of them had lifted a finger to defend the woman. Were they taken by surprise, or did they not care to help? Nobody knew, and nobody would think further on it now. All eyes were fixed on Shui Meng. Droplets of blood ran down the curve of Long Cheng's blade and dripped onto the floor. One drop, two, until a small crimson puddle pooled at his feet. The Phoenix chick had plummeted into an inescapable abyss. A scream rang out, splitting the air like a death knell. Murder! Shui Meng killed a witness. He's gone mad. Chaos erupted. Who moved first was impossible to tell, as hot tempers and old grudges flared past their breaking point, like a bowstring pulled until it snapped. Xisheng Peak members and cultivators from the upper cultivation realm clashed openly in the center of the hall. Vengeance, fear, prejudice. With so many underlying motives, the scene spun out of control almost immediately. In the middle of these furiously clanging swords, Shui Jingyong gritted his teeth through the pain of his injury and hollered, "Stop fighting! Put your weapons down!" But even if those from Xisheng Peak heeded him, those from the upper cultivation realm would not. And so the fighting continued. Shui Meng's heart had been shattered, ground to dust. The rims of his eyes were red as he swung his scimitar at these ghouls. Ugly sobs racked his body and tears ran down his face. Perhaps, at this moment, the Phoenix chick understood what Mo-Run had felt in his childhood, when he'd used the machete to take the lives of everyone at the House of Drunken Jade. There was despair, revulsion, and self-loathing. Yet there was also a sickening thrill. Nothing else mattered anymore. The only thing that could quench the fire of fury consuming his heart was shedding hot blood. Invoking the House of Drunken Jade? Really? 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 A sword cut in front of him, stopping him in his tracks. The blade shone a lustrous blue, distantly familiar. But Shui Meng was too far gone to recognize it, and only shouted at the man holding it, an ugly disciple in Tashui Palace robes, "Get out of my way!" Calm down. Stop fighting or it'll be too late. The voice was familiar as well. Who was it? Shui Meng couldn't place it, but then he didn't care to. Pain and rage churned in his heart. There was only so much a person could endure. Past that point, even gods would become demons, and saints become sinners. Write that the fuck down. A single moment was all it took to change the course of one's life. Shui Meng's eyes flashed with hatred, an endless hatred that had taken root at Tianyin Pavilion and now consumed him with the force of its eruption. Fuck off! Long Cheng and the Blue Blade screamed as they scraped against each other, but to Shui Meng's surprise, the ugly man was his match, meeting him swing for swing. His eyes, the green of jade, were pinned on Shui Meng's face. If you don't calm down, you'll make things worse for Xisheng Peak. What the fuck do you know? Mind your own damn business. Each swing of his scimitar was more frantic than the last, yet every one was blocked by the unyielding blue blade. Green eyes met black. That gaze was so familiar. Who? Ziming, stop. The low voice resounded in his ears. It wasn't an impassioned plea by any means, but there was a discernible trace of anxiety and sorrow in its deep tones. A bolt of clarity cleaved through the chaos of Shui Meng's mind, and he halted his offensive, chest heaving. He was covered in blood, his hair a bedraggled mess as he pinned that ugly stranger with a furious glare. You... Yet before he could continue, a chill ran up his spine. Shui Meng spun around, raising Longcheng to block too late. With a spray of blood, a blade bit deep into his arm, revealing the white of bone. Meng! At the sight of his beloved son injured, Shui Jingyong rushed down the stairs to aid him. The dozen or so Tianyin Pavilion members were Mu Yanli's right-hand men, willing to lay down their lives for their leader. Seeing Shui Jingyong start forward, their eyes flashed, and they flew at Shui Meng. Any one of them would have been more than a match for an elder from Xisheng Peak, but they circled around the injured Shui Meng like a pack of wolves, intent on taking his life. Meng! But Shui Jingyong was too far away. As he waded through the melee, more and more people rushed toward him, surrounding him and blocking his path. Desperate to protect his son, he let the blows fall on top of the injuries he'd already suffered, blood soaking his robes. Gritting his teeth, Shui Meng brandished his scimitar, driving back 2 attackers with 1 slash. But the gash on his arm was bleeding heavily, and his entire arm shook. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flash of something red. Look out! The very jade-eyed man who'd faced off with him earlier blocked the spell meant for Shui Meng. A Tianyin Pavilion member narrowed his eyes. Tashui Palace is defecting, planning to side with Xisheng Peak. The jade-eyed man didn't answer, his blade reflecting a frosty light as he turned to the pale Shui Meng. Ignoring his vicious glare, he said, "Go to Uncle, now." Shui Meng pressed a hand over the gash on his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. The wound was so deep that the pale bone beneath the flesh and muscle was exposed, and his whole arm was soaked in hot blood. His lips moved, but nothing came out. His gaze swept over the crowd, looking for Shui Jingyong. When he found him, what little color remained in his face drained away. He staggered toward his father, heedless of the danger. "Dad!" Eyes flashing, Shui Jingyong surged forward again, raising an arm to block an attack from behind him with his bracer. With a twist of his wrist, he sent his assailant flying backward. Shui Meng huffed an explosive sigh of relief, then rushed to his father's side, ignoring the fighting around him. "Dad!" When he reached him, he grasped Shui Jingyong's arm, knuckles white, and said, relieved and agonized, "You're okay. I'm so glad you're okay. Don't speak so fucking soon." In truth, Shui Jingyong's last block had torn open another old injury. His torso was bleeding afresh, but his robes were already dark with blood. Shui Meng couldn't see it. He gripped his father's hand. "Dad, they need to pay. I won't let any of these people make it out of here alive. Hacking coughs cut him short. Shui Meng stared as Shui Jingyong dropped to his knees on the floor, choking out a mouthful of blood. "Dad?" The Phoenix chick could only look on in a daze. Never had he seen his father so badly injured, and his brain struggled to process the sight. "Dad, what's wrong? Shui Jingyong's bloodied mouth opened and closed as he grabbed Shui Meng's arm, the hoarse words coming only after a delay. "Stop this." "What?" Shui Jingyong's eyes were fixed on Shui Meng's face, but at the edges of his vision, he could see the chaos swirling around them. Was this violence something he wanted? The air was filled with screams and shouts. Crimson blood splashed onto the floor, mingled with the white of brain matter. The mastermind behind these tragedies had yet to be found, but already the sects had turned on each other. "Xisheng Peak has to stop fighting," Shui Jingyong said. And fighting here is going to help how?" Shui Jingyong's ashen face was weighed down by defeat. "We have no choice. Either the sect gets dissolved, or it gets wiped out." Shui Meng couldn't reply. His eyes were red-rimmed and his hands trembled down to the tips of his fingers. Go on. Shui Jingyong gently pushed him forward. Tears spilled down Shui Meng's face, but he stumbled to his feet to stand in front of his father before shouting the order. Everyone, stop fighting. Put your weapons down. That's the end of the chapter. Here's the thing about Meat Bun. She's a troll. She is a troll writer. She's one of the trolliest troll writers you will ever fucking encounter. And she does this on purpose, like any good troll writer, right? They troll you on purpose so that no matter how blatant they are about anything, there's always that little part of you that's like, well, yeah, but like, she's a fucking troll. If she's doing something this, up front and in your face about it, it could just be because she's going to just be a troll. And, zig when you think she's going to zag, right? That's like one of her things. This is one of those moments. When we come back from the break, we'll be on page 207 for chapter 284. Which is called Live On, My Son. I'm going to go refill my mug, probably. And when we come back, we'll get into the second half of the stream, in which everything will be fine. I'll be right back. We're back. Sorry that took an extra couple of minutes. The cat needed love, and so did I. So, we're on page 207 for chapter 284, which is called Live On, My Son. And I can tell from the results of the poll that we have chosen to believe Meat Bun that it is going to be Shui Jingyang who gets the axe. The words seemed to drain him of all his pride and strength. Shui Meng closed his eyes, tears coursing down his cheeks. Stop fighting. But the conflict was like an inferno, easy to ignite and hard to put out. The battle had already left dead and wounded strewn over Loyalty Hall. Their blood had become the fuel that fanned the flames of resentment and madness to a roaring peak. Few people heard Shui Meng's howl or Shui Jingyang's sigh. Even if they did, their eyes were dyed red with bloodlust. They wouldn't stop. Too much had transpired. Murders, the Heavenly Rift, the Zhenlong chess formation, the dead of Guiyue, the mess of Jiangdan Hall, the leaderless Baton Manor, the massacre at Wubei Temple. Many of the cultivators present had lost friends and family in recent days. All things Hua Binan could have had his fucking water bitch little hands in. Who was behind it? Who spoke the truth and who was lying? They had no answer, but everything pointed to Xisheng Peak. The accumulated hatred and fear had detonated here today. Water spilled could not be gathered up. Outside of the metaphorical implications, invoking water in this moment might be my villain origin story. I can't speak anymore. It's a good thing I don't read for the next 45 minutes. Shui Meng hadn't been in a great many battles. He couldn't see the direction things were headed. His chest heaved as he stood in place, staring at the scene of slaughter. But as Shui Jingyang looked over the battlefield, he saw it clearly. At this point, no one was in control. This was likely far beyond what even the instigators had imagined. He clenched his jaw, blinking stars out of his eyes as he shoved down the devastating pain in his abdomen. He grabbed Shui Meng by the shoulder. "You need to go, now." "Dad, get out of here. Go to your mom. Don't argue." But the horde had already surrounded them, mad with bloodlust. "Shui Meng, you killed my Xishang. You'll pay with your life. You're the son of a beast." Shui Meng froze. He'd killed this person's Xishang? When? He'd never hurt anyone or taken a life. His mind was a complete mess. In the chaos, he looked down and saw Longcheng dripping with blood. Terror engulfed him. Yes, he'd killed people. He'd killed. First that lying matchmaker, and then he didn't remember. He'd madly begun the killing. His face and hands were covered in blood. All of him covered. Shui Meng threw back his head and howled like a dying beast. Veins stood out on his temples, his face a rictus of agony. How had it come to this? Since the day Mo Run left, everything had gone wrong. Everything had spun out of control. He'd drifted farther and farther away from the person he used to be. "I killed someone. Dad, I killed someone." He turned in a panic and met Shui Jingyang's eyes, stark in a bone-white face. Shui Jingyong grabbed his hands and pulled Shui Meng behind him, wielding his iron fan as he blazed a trail of blood through their attackers. Go. On the verge of death, he still gave his son, no longer so young, a way out. Meng, go now. But Shui Meng only stood there, lost. Yet another attacker came at them, but Shui Jingyong could no longer swing the fan. He reached out and grabbed the attacker's blade. Blood spurted from the bone-deep cuts. Shui Jingyong swore, unsheathing a dagger at his waist and burying it in his opponent's belly. Blood ran in rivers over the floor of the hall. Go! Roared Shui Jingyong. Catching sight of a face in the crowd, he shouted, Han Shui, take him away. Mei Han Shui had been trying to press closer this whole time. Finally, he broke through. He flew to Shui Meng's side and looked one last time at Shui Jingyong, his eyes full of suppressed pain. Then he grabbed Shui Meng's arm. Come with me, he said in a low voice. Cutting a path through the carnage, he dragged the numb Shui Meng toward the back door of Loyalty Hall. Inside, there are two wolves. One is deeply fucking sad and anxious about the fact that Shui Jingyong is like about to fucking die, and Shui Meng has now done something that he'll never come back from, and he'll blame himself for all of this happening and for Shui Jingyong's really inevitable death, and he's just gonna, this is fucking terrible and it's awful and I'm utterly destroyed. The other wolf is alight with the glee of shipping fodder, and I don't know how to reconcile the two in this moment, so I hoped that by saying it out loud, at least someone might validate my experience. Perhaps the defection of Tashui Palace was too shocking. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Mei Han Shui was at the door, Shui Meng in tow. The remaining cultivators charged at the two of them, shrieking, "You killed our sectmates and now you're running off? Who's going to pay?" One-handed, Mei Han Shui strummed his harp. The clang cut through the air like a storm of stone, sending their enemies staggering backward, but he'd barely exhaled in relief when he heard Shui Jingyong yell, "Behind you!" Mei Han Shui whipped around to see a man, face streaked with grime, grinning malevolently as he slashed down at Shui Meng. He raised his hand, too late. An iron fan scythed through the hall, full of spiritual energy. It swerved in midair and tore a hole through the man's chest. "Uncle! Dad!" Both young men turned in shock. Shui Jingyong was gasping for breath. He'd clearly spent too much of himself in that final strike. The iron fan, having felled its target, clattered to the floor. Crimson ran down its spines. The words written there, whether Shui is beautiful or others are ugly, were no longer legible. Shui Jingyong waved a hand, feebly shooing them away. Voice faltering, he urged, "Go." He was still speaking. In Shui Meng's shrinking pupils, a blade appeared, suffused with spiritual energy. A disciple from Jiangdong Hall stood behind Shui Jingyong with his sword held aloft. Before Shui Meng could cry out, he brought the blade whistling down on his father's head. The world seemed to go silent. Shui Meng's eyes widened. He couldn't hear a thing. It was like he'd sunk to the depths of the sea. There was no breeze, no warmth, no light. Everything was dark. All the blood in Shui Meng's body seemed to freeze, then boil. Hairs stood up on the back of his neck, his face a rictus of grief as he stared at his father through the mayhem. Shui Jingyong had only just watched his son get to safety. A look of relief lingered on his face, frozen in that instant. It almost looked as if he had gone peacefully. The sea was so deep, a void without end. The freezing water pierced his flesh in an eternal ache. It was so quiet. Dead quiet. There was no sound at all. Nothing. Blood ran from that cracked skull, trickling down his eyes and his cheeks. 2 thick streams fell like twin tracks of red tears. For a single mad moment, Shuimeng thought it must be a joke, or a dream. That everything could be turned back, that there was still time. But he was wrong. He was too late. To care for anyone was to have a weakness. Even gods of war could die. Dad! His howl echoed like the fall of a mountain into the sea. The silence shattered. Waves surged like frothing snow, heavy stone breaking through the surf in a hideous crash that shook the skies. Crazed with grief, Shuimeng staggered toward Shui Jingyong. His bestial wailing made everyone pause and turn toward him in fear. The tides parted. He staggered through the crowd, running for Shui Jingyong. His father was still standing. His spine had never bent. Even now, he stared at Shuimeng, his tiger eyes wide, as if he was still alive, as if he could be saved, as if they could. Yet as he drew closer, Shui Jingyong fell. With a great thud, he collapsed, his body still unbent. His assailants scattered. The fighting had stopped. Shuimeng stood frozen. He didn't take another step. He simply stood, shaking from head to toe. His minute trembling turned into violent spasms, rippling through his lips, his fingers, every part of him out of his control. He mumbled, questioning, hesitant. Dad? The hall was awash in blood. No one would ever answer him again. Longcheng clanged to the ground. Shuimeng took a few steps back, then a few more. But where could he go? Back to yesterday? Yesterday would never return. Any step in life, whether taken by thoughtless coincidence or in scouring anguish, could never be undone. It was silent in Loyalty Hall. Shuimeng's feet stopped. With a shudder, he knelt on the ground, staring dully at the scene before him. Tears streamed down his face. He reached up to scrub them away, but none of his wiping was any use. His tears kept coming. At last he buried his face in his palms, whimpering softly. His sorrow was like ink on paper, slowly spreading, filling the page with smears of black. Dad! Dad! Those swallowed-up sobs became howling wails. The man who had shielded Shuimeng would never stand up again, would never beat back the trials of life with his broad shoulders and sunny smile. For the darling of the heavens, I was doing so well. The carefree days of his youth now truly came to an end, reduced to a crumbling ruin. It was a mess. All of it a mess. The disciple from Jiangdong Hall still stood behind Shui Jingyong. His sword fell from limp fingers. "No," he mumbled. "No, it wasn't me." He shook his head, trembling like chaff as he watched Shui Meng where he knelt, wild-eyed. He wanted to run, but all eyes were on him. There was nowhere he could go. "No, I can explain. I only wanted to strike the weapon from his hand." He stared at Shui Meng, swallowing anxiously. Shui Meng was drowning in grief, but the disciple knew the moment Shui Meng looked up, all that awaited him was death. "Go get Madame Wang." The Xuanji elder was the calmest among them. He looked at Shui Meng, shivering on the ground. He was still kneeling. He was still sobbing. Xuanji instructed his disciple softly, "Hurry. I fear no one else will be able to stop the young master." The disciple had just watched his sect leader die, and his own face was streaked with tears. "But Shizin, it was the sect leader who forbade the madam from coming. The madam never gets involved in things like this. She..." "Is this the time? How are you still nattering on? Hurry!" Scrubbing at his face, the disciple nodded and took to his heels, sprinting toward the back of the mountain. Now that a sect leader had fallen, the fighting finally died down. Some whimpered from the pain of their injuries, while others were slightly green. Some stood with their lips pursed in silence, while one person whispered, "What happened? Shui Jingyong shouldn't have been so weak. Why didn't he dodge the blow?" None of them knew Shui Jingyong had been attacked by a Jinlong pawn only yesterday, gravely injured during his mission in Wuchong town. They sighed. I guess he's been a sect leader for too long. Everyone gets old. He was a hero past his prime." Shui Meng couldn't hear the whispering. Slowly his vision was dyed red by tears and hate. Choking, sobbing, weeping, his eyes flared scarlet like a sea of red maples. He looked up, staring at the crowd of cultivators. All the clarity and earnestness in those eyes had burned out, leaving only blood and hatred, resentment and fury. A roar tore from his throat as Long Chung rose to kill. This time Shui Meng had truly lost his mind. Those around him screamed. He had become terrifying, devoid of rationality or fear. Who could stop him? No one. Wubei Temple, Guiyue, Jiangdong Hall, Huohuang Pavilion. No, he saw none of them. All he could see were the faces of vicious ghosts, the twisted shapes of shadows. He wallowed in purgatory, in the void, in an endless sea of blood. All he felt was hate. Why? Why had 20 years of devotion crumbled before one scheme, a handful of rumors? Why had a lifetime of earnestness become wasted sincerity, empty effort? Why was a singular act of kindness rewarded while a habit of doing good deeds was met with scorn? Why was he so foolish? Blood ran in torrents. He couldn't hear. The pleading of those under his blade was foam and nothingness. Shui Meng had gone insane. A bloodied phoenix amidst burning flames, a crimson-eyed beast rising from an inferno with fangs dripping, snapping its jaws around the throats of all who stood in his way. Once upon a time, during the year Shui Meng had come of age, Shui Jingyong had patted Shui Meng's head in the midst of ringing cicada song and asked him with a smile, "What does my son want to do in the future?" "I want to be just like Dad." The little phoenix had looked up through limpid eyes. "I want to be a great hero, a good man who punishes evil and upholds justice. I want to die with no regrets." Blood sprayed over his face. Someone was screaming. Who had he killed? Someone's sister, maybe, or their wife. It didn't matter. They could die, he could kill. He had no innocence to preserve. They'd brought this on themselves, after all. They'd driven him to this. He slaughtered them, consumed by madness. Distantly, he saw that the crowd had parted. He He couldn't hear a thing. He couldn't hear. A quiet voice cut through the ringing in his ears. Monger. A shaking voice, doing its best to suppress some great emotion, soft as a spiral of smoke rising from an incense burner, dissipating at the touch of a finger. The words seemed to grab him by the heart. Shuimeng paused, dazed. Take him down! Stop him! People came at him from all sides. Monger. Shuimeng was like a panther surrounded by wolves, bathed in blood. His injured arm was shaking uncontrollably. At this rate, he might never be able to fight with it again. He narrowed his eyes, scarlet streaking his vision, and turned numbly toward the voice. The back door of Loyalty Hall was open, hazy sunlight slanting in. Madame Wong had appeared at the doorway, dressed in white. Her health was fragile, and her temperament gentle. She'd never intervened in such matters, until now, having heard the news and rushed toward the hall. The woman they had always known as meekly beautiful arrived, a tear-sodden mess. Mom, rasped Shuimeng, his voice shredded by grief. The disciples of Xishang Peak knelt in greeting. Madam. The elders made their bows. Madame Wong. Her face was white as paper, the bright coral beads of her earrings the only spots of color on her pale figure. She said nothing, first flinching as her gaze fell upon her husband's corpse, then paling further at the sight of Shuimeng disoriented and forced to his knees. Knowing how frail she was, the members of Xishang Peak feared she'd faint from the shock. But Madame Wong only trembled, her lips moving but failing to form speech. On her second attempt, she spoke. Her voice was awful to hear, but she'd composed herself with all the will she had. Let him go. 3 words, said softly to those surrounding Shuimeng. Many of these cultivators had never laid eyes on Madame Wong. Seeing her now, they thought her merely a weak woman and snarled back at her. Your son's killed so many people. Why should we let him go? He must be brought before Tianyan Pavilion for sentencing. Madame Wong's eyes swam with tears, but she repeated herself, resolute. Let him go. No one moved. They were locked in a stalemate. Madame Wong raised her chin, as if trying to keep her tears from spilling over, but to no avail. Salty tears rolled down her cheeks, and she closed her eyes, her slender body shaking like willow fuzz in the wind. Xishang Peak refused to disband and harmed countless cultivators, someone called out. Not to mention the matter of Mo Run and Chu Wanning, which is far too suspicious. Regardless, justice must be served. Murder must be paid for with the murderer's life. That's the natural order. Madam, our apologies. Madame Wong said nothing. She didn't look at her husband's body again. The crowd parted for her as she slowly ascended the steps up to the dais of Loyalty Hall and came to a stop before the sect leader's seat. A susurration of murmurs continued beneath her. The death of Shui Jingmen was an accident, but Shuimeng was aiming to kill. That's right, he must be taken into custody. The noise rose and fell like the tide. A draft swept through the hall. The curtains fluttered, and a cool light shone through the inner drapes. Shuimeng's crimes. A resounding boom startled the cultivators into silence. The person slamming their hand down on the table was this woman as frail as a weed. Madame Wong's eyes were wide, her beautiful face flushed. She had never been given to fits of temper, but fury had kindled in her heart. She stood before the hall, eyes sweeping over those assembled. Meng-er's my son, Ron-er's my nephew, and Zheng Yong is my husband. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was clear and firm. You've torn out my nephew's core and taken my husband's life. Now you want to take my son from me as well? For all that Jiangdong Hall had the highest proportion of female cultivators in their sect, it was they who were least sympathetic to Madame Wong. One young woman immediately spoke out. Lady Wong, be reasonable. That's right, if your nephew hadn't cultivated forbidden techniques, would we have cut out his core? If your husband had listened, would this tragedy have occurred today? If your son hadn't killed so many, would there be a need to detain him? Lady Wong, your bias shouldn't be so overt. The sects had honed their hate for Xisheng Peak. They wouldn't let them off easily. Disband the sect. Take everyone who fought here today away. They must all be tried. None of these murderers deserve to go free. None of them should be let off. Round them up. Madame Wong stood there before the hall, facing the disastrous aftermath of the battle. She closed her eyes, then slowly spoke. I stand here now as the sect leader's widow. None of you will lay a hand on Xisheng Peak or my son while I live. The audience found this laughable. Only Jiangxi's expression shifted. At the side of the hall, another woman from Jiangdong Hall was the first to respond. My, you certainly have an elevated opinion of yourself. Madame Wong descended the steps, ignoring the female cultivator. She gazed steadily back at those watching her. What righteousness is there in bullying a fatherless child and a widowed mother? She reached the last step and came to a stop on the burgundy carpet embroidered with pollia flowers. When she looked up again, her eyes were still beautiful, her features still gentle, but her gaze was determined. She raised a hand and pulled a silver bangle off her wrist. The mocking female cultivator narrowed her eyes. What's this? Madame Wong reached up. A beam of blinding red flashed in her palm as she brought her slender hands together and crushed the silver bangle to dust. Terrified, several people in the crowd took a step back. Even those of Xisheng Peak were stunned into silence. Shuimeng looked at his mother with astonishment. Jiangxi, and Jiangxi alone, looked at her without surprise, his expression dreadful. Xisheng Peak will persist in life or death. Those of you who wish to dissolve our sect, come up. Madame Wong let the silver dust trickle through her fingers. She looked out at the crowd, speaking words that made them pale in fear. And challenge me. That's exactly what I was afraid of. I may have only casually tossed out the idea once that all three of them could be toast. But this is what I was afraid of. Afraid of to the point where I didn't even put Madame Wong on the poll. I was like, I'll make neither an option. I won't put Madame Wong up there, or I won't put it all three up there. No. We won't tempt fate in that way. It's the end of the chapter, by the way. Next Tuesday will be on page 219 for chapter 285, which is called The Phoenix Scorches the Sky. Listen. They're all dead. They're all gonna die. That's all that. Mei Hanshui might be the only one who leaves this situation like alive. Maybe. Depending. They're just all gonna die. All of them. Every single person on the cover of this book is going to be dead by the end of the volume. and we'll just kind of have to live with that. Question. The person who appeared and told Shuimeng to just go back to Zhengyang, ugly guy that was familiar though. I swear I thought he was like 3 different people in the short time that he appeared. But I'm too everything to think even remotely clearly. Do we know who that is supposed to be, or is that supposed to be a mystery? And if we do know, somebody please tell me, because I legitimately cannot form a coherent thought at this moment. Liv suggested Mei Hung Shui, but it can't be Mei Hung Shui because he was ugly. And we know that Mei Hung Shui is not ugly. It is a mystery? Great. Fantastic. We know he had green eyes and a deepish voice. And he was ugly, whatever that means. So it couldn't have been Chuaning. Maybe. No, deep voice. Couldn't have been Chimay. I mean, unless we're just like affecting our voice, which actually, didn't they say that Chimay had something that changed his voice? He did. What if it was Chimay? Made himself ugly, changed his voice. Huh. Henry says, but does Chimay have green eyes? It depends. If he's making him feel, woo, as I bite the inside of my mouth, if he's making himself ugly, then I would think he would also like change the color of his eyes. If he's changing his face and his voice, then I would presume. But I don't know. But I get to write that down for who the fuck is ugly jade eye blue sword guy. Oh, deep voice. Gotta add the deep voice. Who can say? It'd be really wild if it was a disguised Taisha and Jun, but I don't think that's... Oh, Jesse, it was Han Shui. Shui Meng just calls him ugly. Now that you say that, that does kind of sound familiar. Calling him ugly. But which was that? I think that was the... I think the first thought I had was that it was Mei Han Shui. Who's definitely high up there on the list of possibilities. And then I think Shimay's blind. Thank you. That's right. Is the blue sword Mei Han Shui? I'm telling you, my thought capacity at the moment is in the negative integers. Oh, Henry. If it's other universe Mei Han Shui with a spell, I'm presuming a spell to disguise himself. Or something. That would be wild. OG timeline Mei Han Shui coming up out of nowhere to help save Shui Meng would so not be on my bingo card. That would be so far off the reservation. But if anything, just with the ugly thing, if that holds true, which, again, that does sound familiar now, and if the blue sword is supposed to be his, then I think we're supposed to be thinking that. I would fucking freak out if all of a sudden OG Meihan Shui was. Two different personalities. One of them's flirty, one of them's serious. Two different personalities. That's been the whole Meihan Shui mystery. OG timeline Meihan Shui. We've been seeing OG timeline and current Meihan Shui. We've been getting both of them. I have to go. I have to leave. I have to not be here anymore. I'm gonna go do laps around my neighborhood until I puke, maybe. So I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna like fucking leave. I'll be here on Tuesday at 3 p.m. to read more of whatever the fuck this is, and then at 2:15 p.m. on that same day to talk about whatever the fuck that we just read for YouTube members and patrons. Like the stream if you love Shui Daddy, and I'm gonna go. All right? Yeah. Okay. Fucking bye. Bye. Bye.